Has Swift finally replaced the need for XRP? We're going to break down what the Swift new blockchain ledger is all about, along with a breakdown of the DTCC and their initiative going live this week, July 15th, with the process of bringing their 100 trillion plus of tokenized securities on chain and the settlement of 4.7 quadrillion in 2025. That's coming to a ledger, going to start on Canton. Stellar's in the roadmap, and XRP's involved in the patent. And then we'll compare this with the measly flow of 16 trillion that Ripple cleared last year and how all this adds up. Where does XRP fit in? And has XRP been replaced? The question that many people are wondering right now. We're going to get right on into the update. My name is Zach Rector. I cover current events, financial markets, and the greatest transfer of wealth in world history. I want you to win. I can't give you financial advice, but I'm always going to keep it real. I'm going to provide the facts and the data. I'm going to share my insights and analysis. And I'm going to tell you when I make money, when I lose money, and I definitely do a little bit of both. But let's get right on into the slideshow. I hope you guys appreciate the content. This is the confirmation here is that we're tokenizing everything. It's all coming on chain. Swift, their blockchain ledger just went live with 17 banks across 6 continents, 24/7 messaging. That's what this is. Tokenized deposits for cross-border payments built in 9 months. And they're really slapping themselves on the back and cheering this on. This is pretty quick for these traditional institutions to build something like this in 9 months. But the problem with the Swift blockchain ledger is that they basically just made their messaging a little bit faster. Before you have to go complete the final settlement through existing systems. So this permission chain has no native asset. There's no bridge currency. There's no native asset at all for this ledger. It's basically moving their, distributed ledger that they already had to just an updated, faster messaging system. That's all this is. I mean, this is like saying your Google search results are going to come back a few seconds faster. That's what this is, right? Compare that to the XRP ledger would be more comparable to tapping AI, LLMs, like large language models, to the search results, right? So the difference here is the messaging that Swift is doing got a little bit faster, but the settlement in Swift, the last tally we had was 5 to 6 trillion. They're now, the estimates are 10 to 20 trillion of daily settlement has to take place, but it doesn't happen on Swift's ledger. It doesn't happen anywhere in Swift's network. Swift always has been and still is going to be a messaging service at the end of the day. Settlement has to take place somewhere else. And so we're going to be watching Swift as they roll this out. This is them finally coming about. And guys, this whole process started in August of 2022. I remember reading about Swift, migrating to ISO 222 back in August of 2022. So if you've gotten into this asset class in the last year and you're frustrated with timelines, just know that we've been reading about ISO and go live dates and regulatory clarity. All of this was supposed to happen back in 2020. So needless to say, we're way behind schedule. And the funny part is that, Swift comes out, they announce this, it's a big deal, still doesn't do any settlement. All it is they move their messaging to an equivalent blockchain. But at the end of the day, they didn't improve any of the settlement of this. And this is where you'll still need XRP. So to answer the question, has Swift replaced XRP? Not at all. Swift hasn't replaced the old traditional settlement system. And XRP is a better settlement system than the existing one. So where do you think this ultimately goes? Let's go back into the slideshow, though. So next we go and we take a look at what the DTCC is rolling out. July 15th is the go live date where the pilot begins. And in October, they'll roll out the full launch. Now, they custody over 100 trillion of securities. But when you look at the settlement, the trading that takes place at the DTCC, in 2024, it was 3.7 quadrillion. In 2025, it was 4.7 quadrillion. So we're talking about a network that is growing at a quadrillion dollars per year. That's how much is moving across the DTCC. It's not just the 100 trillion that's tokenized, it's that settlement. And at the end of the day, to drive XRP to a higher price or whatever asset's going to be used, settlement on the chain is required. It's not just tokenizing the 100 trillion of securities and representing it on chain. This is why Canton really hasn't gotten that much of a bounce in price, despite them moving trillions within their system. Right? They're not conducting the settlement using the token, and so the Canton token has this whole deal. They're settling and moving trillions, right? But it hasn't moved the token price because they're not using the token for settlement. It's not enough to represent the tokenized assets on the chain to move the price of the native asset. You need the trading and the settlement between that tokenized deposit, stablecoin, whatever it is, tokenized securities, and then you pair that up with XRP. That's what drives demand for XRP at the end of the day. If the DTCC said today, we're bringing our 100 trillion of tokenized securities on chain, what would really push up the price is the narrative of that utility, right? Right away, you wouldn't start seeing the trading of all of that, driving XRP to, incredible prices right away, right? But the first step is to bring the equity on chain, to bring the real world assets on chain. And the second part is to build out that liquidity. And this is the whole advantage of XRP and the XRP ledger, is that it's been built as a hub for liquidity, the best place for liquidity. So just like Tether and Circle, they issued their stablecoins on all of the top chains with the best liquidity, right? And I think that they've spited XRP ledger because they know the competition, right? So they've gone to Ethereum, Solana, every other blockchain besides the XRP ledger, which I find interesting. But at the end of the day, we are looking at the DTCC. They're going live this week, July 15th, and it's starting on Canton. Now, their roadmap has going live on Stellar in the first half of 2027. That's subject to change. We'll see how that actually rolls out. And then the other sleeper we can't forget is that they included XRP Ledger in their patent for this. And Ripple Prime is also part of the working group. If we go back to the slideshow right here, the working group has firms from Wall Street, and it also has crypto native firms including Circle, Ondo, and Ripple Prime is part of this DTCC pilot. Go live July 15th, full launch October. Now we move over to Ripple, the little startup out of San Francisco that we've been saying is not just a little ordinary startup out of San Francisco utilizing XRP, which is not an ordinary little crypto. But this little startup out of San Francisco, through their acquisitions of Hidden Road and G Treasury, they cleared 16 trillion in annual payments and clearing last year in 2025. So Hidden Road, that's the prime brokerage platform that settled 3 trillion. That's now Ripple Prime. G Treasury, that's the treasury business that settled 13 trillion last year. That's now Ripple Treasury. And then Rail was the stablecoin company, another acquisition that they made to increase, acquire more rails, essentially. Hence the name Rail, the company, right? And between all of these, you're at 16 trillion. And here's the gap, right? Is that Brad Garlinghouse said on CNBC June 26, digital assets today represent about 0% of this 16 trillion in flows. There's your opportunity gap. Where in 2026 in July, you have XRP should not be at $1, but it's at $1 because we still are not using XRP yet. Why? Lack of regulations. That's it. That's what this comes down to. The other part I will add is that Ripple just completed the acquisitions last year. So you don't just, complete the acquisitions and then move everybody over. G Treasury already doing 13 trillion. Ripple's not going to come in and say, hey guys, we're going to force XRP down your throat. Everybody has to adopt and use XRP now. The process isn't overnight, but the process is underway. And the opportunity gap is clear and quantifiable. We're going from 0 to 16 trillion. The goal is for Ripple to bring, chunks of that onto the XRP ledger where it makes sense, where there's efficiencies, not force it on people, but where it makes sense, where there's a business use case. And there's a lot of reason to bring most of this to the XRP ledger. And so we have three different ecosystems here. Right? Three different companies, three different ecosystems. You have Swift, you have the DTCC, and then you have the XRP ledger with Ripple. And I want to show you guys on the slideshow here the comparison between the three. With Access, your permissioned environments for both Swift and the DTC, it's members only. With the XRP ledger, obviously it's public, neutral, completely permissionless. Anybody can use the XRP ledger, can run an XRP ledger node, validator, etc. Now the settlement, there's none in the Swift ledger. It all takes place off ledger in the existing old rails. And remember, this is the system that creates the Nostro Vostro accounts to amass 20 to 30 trillion of dormant capital. What happens is the banks have to put in trillions of dormant capital aside. So it's like, we can only trade and trust each other if I know that you got a trilly parked somewhere on the sidelines as kind of an insurance policy. That's what Nostro Vostro is. And it's literally 20 to 30 trillion is the last numbers. That was from years ago. That might even be bigger now. I mean, Swift went from 5 trillion daily to now 10 trillion plus daily. And so I would imagine that the Nostro Vostro accounts have had to increase as well too. So the dormant capital that we have sitting on the sidelines is capital that these banks and institutions can't use. And what Ripple's already started to implement into the G Treasury business is these companies that have their Treasury accounts, their corporate accounts, right? By utilizing RLUSD, they can start, and other stablecoins, but primarily RLUSD, they can be earning yield on their dormant capital while it's sitting there as well too. So you see where XRP and Ripple Solutions fills in, and provides solutions on multiple parts of this whole story. But back to the comparison between the three. There's no settlement on the Swift ledger at all. All they did was make their messaging a little bit faster. They went from dial-up to high-speed internet for their messaging. Still no settlement. DTCC, the settlement is inside the DTC's walls. So they do have settlement within their system. They're going to start on Canton. They also will have both. They'll have the traditional securities that are not tokenized, and they'll have the tokenized securities, and you'll be able to bridge back and forth between them. For what's going to be tokenized on chain, we know they're starting on Canton. Stellar's on the roadmap. XRP Ledger is in the patent. Ripple Prime on the working group. Of course, the XRP Ledger is 3 to 5 seconds at almost no cost. The messaging, the settlement, all done within 3 to 5 seconds. So it blows out. I mean, we're not even, there's no comparison because Swift doesn't even do it, right? Now, there is no native asset for the Swift Ledger or the DTCC service either. With the XRP Ledger, you already know, XRP will always maintain that permission, that privileged role on the XRP Ledger. The auto bridging feature on the XRP Ledger is going to put XRP paired up with the asset that you're trading, the flow, the trade, the swap. The auto bridging feature is going to take that through XRP because in almost every instance is going to provide the best liquidity. This is why you want to tokenize on the XRP Ledger, is you'll have the best liquidity for your asset. XRP on the other side of that pairing. And the track record, well, there's none for Swift. It's just starting. And for the DTCC, there's none. It's just now getting started as well. Compared against the XRP Ledger, which has been live for 14 years, battle-tested and hardened for 14 years. And so, very clear gap between Swift and the DTCC, and a very clear gap between both of those permissioned ecosystems and the XRP Ledger. Now, what this means for all of us at home. Undoubtedly, tokenization is the official roadmap. It's the focus of every Wall Street and firm that is getting into crypto. It's all about tokenization. And you notice how everyone's now talking about utility. It's all about real world assets, utility. This is what the adults in the room, in the XRP community, and Brad Garlinghouse have been saying for a decade, is that this space needs to get to utility. And interoperability is the $1 trillion prize. Has Swift figured it out? Well, they have interoperable messages. That's cute. Has the DTCC figured it out? Yeah, they're relying on private parties and other chains like Canton, right? Off the start, you're seeing. And, the interoperability is something that we've been talking about in the XRP ledger since 2012, even before 2012, before Ripple was a company, before the XRP ledger was created. Right? You go back to Ryan Fugger in 2004, it was all about interoperability. You go back to David Schwartz patent back in 88. It's all about distributed ledger technology. It's open source and permissionless and has interoperability. And that's what XRP does, right? It allows you to build liquidity for your asset and pair it up against every other asset on the XRP ledger. You don't have to go build out these liquidity pools yourself. You can just issue on the XRP ledger, and then every issued asset's paired up with XRP. So as long as you have a pairing with XRP, you're going to have access to all that liquidity, all that interoperability, and XRP sits at the heart of that. XRP is the only reason that's possible. Does ROUSD replace that role, by the way? Absolutely not. No, because ROUSD is not neutral. It's controlled and issued by Ripple. Right. So big difference. And ROUSD will never have the privileged role as first in line for auto bridging, where most of the flows go back through XRP on the ledger. So, I know a lot of people are saying ROUSD replaces XRP. It's completely false. It's not even possible the way the XRP ledger works. It's not possible. I hope everybody understands just how ignorant that comment is. ROUSD replaces XRP. Technically not possible on the XRP ledger. Literally. So, is Swift replacing XRP? Swift is still just doing messaging. They're still playing around. It's a cute story, bro. The DTCC, they're really moving on chain. And it's happening this week. And they have 4.7 quadrillion that needs to be settled somewhere. And I celebrate Canton. Congratulations. I own Canton. Full disclosure. Rooting for them. I'm in the middle of setting my buy orders and figuring out how I can get my bags of XLM back up. And I, of course, own XRP. And this is what we do. Is we look here at Swift. They're settling about 2.5 quadrillion per year. Now, Swift only does the messaging. Chips, Fed, other central banks, other clearinghouses, they do the settlement. But the value of Swift, 2.5 quadrillion per year. Conservative guess, by the way. It could actually be more. They don't report official numbers. DTCC is 4.7 quadrillion. That's 7.2 quadrillion with a Q between just those two ecosystems. Ripple's little 16 trillion looks pretty big for crypto when you compare it to the other crypto firms. Compared to the DTCC and Swift, it's a little puddle of liquidity. But even just bringing that little puddle of liquidity onto the XRP ledger, you better believe that's going to make a difference for XRP. It ain't going to be $1. This sucker ain't going to be $1 for much longer. And the final point that I want to leave everybody with: nothing, nobody, no crypto, no ecosystem, nobody, not Ripple's stablecoin, RUSD, nobody, nothing has replaced XRP yet. 14 years later, we don't have anybody that's come up with a better solution for a bridge currency. Nobody's replaced the role for a bridge currency. And so despite all of this FUD, all this nonsense that's being spouted, we bring you back to the fundamentals, explain how these ledgers actually work, how it's impossible for RUSD to replace XRP, to remind everybody that after a decade, after the biggest institutions in the world have thrown billions of dollars trying to innovate, trying to figure it out, How do we replace Ripple? We don't want to have to give in and do the deal with Ripple. We know we can sign on the dotted line right here. We can get our allocation of XRP, and we can start to use the XRP ledger. But we don't want to give in yet. JP Morgan sends 15 executives to the offices of Ripple. Yeah. They might have picked up a little allocation of XRP. Who knows? All of the testing, all of the sandbox, all of the money in the world, the smartest minds in the world, nobody has replaced that role of the neutral bridge currency, that utility that Rosie Rios, the 43rd Treasurer of the United States of America, she outlined it and made it so simple for everybody to understand in crypto. She said XRP, one of the few digital assets with real utility, real use case, that bridge currency for cross-border payments. And we now understand that it's much more than cross-border payments. It's payments of all sorts. And now it's the tokenization, and the XRP ledger with the programmability that we've been getting is absolutely ready. You want to tokenize stocks, real estate, you name it, we're ready. We are going to build out the best liquidity, and XRP sits at the center of it all. None of it, nobody has been able to replace XRP yet. Let's be very clear about that as we sign off of today's video. If you appreciate the content, help us out by smacking it. Share it out far and wide, especially send it to your friend who thinks that XRP has been replaced by RLUSD, Swift, or some other story that they're telling. Send this video to them so we can get them caught up to speed. And everything else is at my website, zachrector.com. I appreciate all of you guys so much. God bless you. Thank you.